Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Graitec Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is David Spergel. He's an implementation consultant at Graitec and an AEC technology leader with deep experience helping design and construction teams improve how they collaborate, communicate, and execute projects using digital tools. His background spans software enablement, workflow optimization, and customer-facing strategy with a strong focus on platforms like Bluebeam support real-world project delivery. David brings a practical, people-first perspective to emerging technologies. Welcome to the show, David.
Wow, thanks, Todd. That's quite the introduction. And I'm really happy to join you guys and to share the knowledge that I've accumulated through my years working in the industry.
Yeah, well, super excited for the conversation. So let's start as kind of an introduction to people. Talk to me about all those years in the industry. How'd you get into this industry to begin with?
Yeah, so it's interesting. My background is actually, I have a degree in manufacturing engineering from Boston University. With that degree, I actually spent some time working in the 3D printing space. So I worked for several 3D printing companies for a while. And then I found my way to a company called Microsoft Resources, where I joined as part of their, partially their 3D printing team, but also their software enablement team. One of the things that learning manufacturing and engineering allowed me to do was it allowed me to cut my teeth on using a lot of very esoteric softwares, which made me become adept at picking up new technologies very quickly. So what that means is that at Microsoft, I was able to get onboarded with a lot of the technologies that we were utilizing, whether it was Bluebeam or Autodesk products, and become an expert at that. So as our business shifted away from 3D printing and we needed additional experts on the software side, I started to shift my focus towards those products and becoming an expert in those. And then several years later, Microsoft Resources was acquired by the Graitec Group, and here I am, ready to bring my expertise to this much larger, exciting team.
Yeah. I like it. So what I want to kind of center the conversation around today is a two-letter word that maybe you haven't heard a ton about, but AI. So there's so much hype going around AI. But when you strip the hype away, where do you see AI really helping to bring that practical change on how projects are really being executed and coordinated today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously AI is the topic du jour that you can't get away from these days. So you got to just jump in head first. And I want to make a disclaimer off the jump that there's a lot of discourse around AI in every industry. A lot of people afraid of AI coming to take their jobs. A lot of people in the artistic community who are concerned with, what can be done with generative AI. And those are certainly very valid concerns for those industries. One thing I want to clarify is that in our industry, the architecture, engineering, construction field, I don't see any of those concerns really, being an issue in the next decade going forward. And why is that? Well, there's one main reason, and it comes down to, I mentioned people being afraid of AI taking their jobs. Well, in this industry, actually, there's a really big issue of jobs just being gone naturally. There was a survey that came out just a few months ago that was something around 70 to 80% of people in the trades, those are plumbers, electricians, HVAC experts, people in those fields, they'll be retiring in the next 20 years, right? So they won't be in the field anymore. The architecture, engineering, construction industry is actually dealing with a current employee shortage where there's not enough people to do all of the work that needs to get done. And so this means that AI actually has an opportunity to add a lot of real value, being able to be more efficient with your work and being able to get a lot more productivity out of your employees. And the way I see AI kind of being focused in the AEC industry is really there's three pillars. So AI under pressure, labor shortages, thin margins, a lot of data fragmentation across models, PDFs, emails, and field apps. AI is being used to design faster build with fewer surprises, and turn all of that project data into something that you can actually reason over. So those are the kinds of areas where I think AI is really poised to change the game, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. With the outlook on AI in AEC, I've long maintained that it's not a threat. It's an exciting opportunity, actually, and because it will allow people to be more creative and kind of unleash that again and kind of unburden them from some of the, frankly, more boring, mundane tasks, and they get to not be the data crunching person in the background. They get to actually, architects get to have this cool freedom to go design and see if it works, and like then use AI as a great brainstorm partner to bounce ideas off of.
Absolutely. And I think that you bring up a great point. The idea of a building being completely designed by AI it's not even on the radar at this point, right? So, you mentioned, we mentioned some of the artistic fields before. Obviously there are some valid concerns in those fields with generative AI and some of those use cases, but that doesn't exist here
Mhm.
because the construction industry, it's just a completely different beast. Ultimately, all these buildings have to be built by people, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, we've seen the 3D printing robots, making the concrete, which is cool, but ultimately, buildings are built by people. They're designed by people for people. It's always been and will continue to be a people-driven industry.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think last year the trend line around AI was really interesting because you couldn't go into a single conversation without somebody bringing up AI, and so it seemed like it was way more prevalent than what it really was in reality. And then a lot of people started to like reclassify, automation and just being digital as an AI workflow. And there's a difference there. How would you define an workflow in AEC?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's three main areas where I see AI really gaining a foothold in the industry. So the first area is design and engineering intelligence. And so what do I mean by that? Well, doing generative massing and layout tools that suggest building forms, unit layouts, and MEP routes based on input constraints like zoning, daylight, wind, and energy, right? So we already have, we have all the equations, we know the models. Like, for example, if you know the material of something, if you know ambient temperatures, if time of days, time of the year for, sunlight to do energy analysis, we know all of those formulas. We can create these frameworks where we can input this data, input our constraints into the model, and it can come back with a few different options for us, right? So when I talk about things like MEP routing, so for routing HVAC or plumbing or electrical lines, you can input the constraints, you can input the specific regional building codes that you need to adhere to, and it can give you, okay, so here's option A, here's option B, here's option C. So just like you said, taking away the monotonous work. So the creating the design, but it's giving you design options. So,
Mhm.
that's one of the areas where I see AI being able to really make an immediate impact. So companies like Autodesk are pushing what they call neural CAD foundation models that sit under the hood of tools like Forma and Fusion, with the goal being automating like 80 to 90% of the repetitive design tasks to quickly transition projects from early concepts to more detailed layouts, right? So, that's one of the areas where I feel like AI is really poised to gain a foothold. So the AI isn't acting, as a principal designer, but it's kind of like more like your supercharged junior design assistant, right?
Sure.
Exploring the different options, checking against standards, and doing a lot of that boring BIM grunt work so that the human team can focus on trade-offs and making client decisions.
Yeah.
Now,
I think that's a great way to look
sorry.
at it. No, go for
Sorry,
it.
go ahead. I was gonna say one of the other areas. Now I just mentioned the design phase. Now let's talk a little bit about construction management and field execution. So what's happening is that you've got AI co-pilots that are living inside project platforms, right? So Autodesk Build, Procore, Trimble, they each kind of have their own AI intelligence layers that they're building into their platforms. And what makes implementing the AI into the platforms really powerful is that the platforms they're kind of becoming the gatherers of all the data, right? They have the models, they have the PDFs, they have the submittals, right? So now with the AI having all of this information, you can generate the RFIs, you can generate the submittal summaries, create meeting minutes, create daily logs from unstructured text that goes back and forth. And what this really does is, it streamlines the communication. And I know that sounds like a buzzword. It kind of is. So what do I mean by streamlining communication? Well, I think it's important to emphasize that, like we keep emphasizing, that this is a people-driven industry. And when you have people involved, you have emotions, you have competing time schedules, you have different personalities, and sometimes things get lost in translation. Communication lines can drop off for many reasons, right? Let's say working with Joe on the construction site. He's really hot-headed. Whenever he gets bad news on a delay, he blows a gasket. Maybe you don't want to tell him that the shipment's going to be delayed because you don't want the reaction. Now, this isn't a great way to do things, but it's real, and these are real things that come into play. And with AI, one of the ways it can streamline communication is proactively notifying Jim at the construction site about these delays based on the information that it's gathering from shipment dates, from other data that's being input, and it can create those lines of communications without me having to pick up the phone, call him, and get chewed out for 5 minutes about why something is late.
Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically
I'm sure this
speaking,
doesn't happen ever. Yeah.
never happened to me before. But yeah, these are real things that happen, and just having the models be proactive versus reactive really kind of shifts the narrative around what it can do. One of the other areas that I see it being very powerful, there are companies that are they're creating what they call photo and video intelligence platforms, where they use computer vision systems to identify safety risks, track progress, address quantities or missing elements by using site photos and 360-degree captures. So, one use case would be, you have 3 or 4 360-degree cameras, you mount them at certain points along the job site, and they feed image data into the AI model maybe every hour, every 2 hours. Well, you can set that cadence however you like. And what it can do is it can track, okay, this wall was supposed to be up based on the plans that I'm aware of. I can see based on these images that the wall is not up. And based on this, now I can predict that we're going to be behind schedule by a week. And I can notify the relevant parties, and we can address that shortfall. So this is one of the areas, again, being proactive versus reactive, setting up those vision systems. It's like having somebody there at the job site 24/7, monitoring the progress and checking it against the drawings.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about some tools, because what is kind of interesting with all these new technologies and platforms coming out. It seems that one of the things that is outliving all the next big platforms is the PDFs. Why do you think that they remain really the industry's kind of common language across the workflow?
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? So when you're designing your building, you're using whatever software, whether it's Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD. They all have their own native file formats that are only used for that particular platform. Ultimately, once the design needs to be moved on to the next phase of the process, it's going to be in PDF. PDF is the de facto industry standard for sharing documents, right? And so this makes platforms like I mentioned, Autodesk Build, or Nemetschek has Bluebeam and its Studio platform to read all of those PDFs and kind of be the facilitator for those, puts them in a unique position to kind of be the platform for AI, right? Since all of the drawings will ultimately become PDFs, PDF becomes the industry standard for sharing that information. Now, I can talk to Bluebeam very specifically because I have a lot of experience working with Bluebeam. Bluebeam is the industry leading PDF and markup solution in case you're not familiar with it. It also has platforms for built-in collaboration and project management. So it's in a unique position to kind of take AI and run with it. And what it's doing is it's implementing AI in a few very interesting ways. One of them that I'm very excited about actually is utilizing what's called MCP, which is Model Context Protocol. And what that does is it lets an AI large language model, it essentially gives it function hooks into your software. So you can have your AI agent up on one side of the screen. In this case, Bluebeam, we're talking about Bluebeam. You could have Bluebeam up on the other side of the screen, and you could essentially talk to your drawing using the AI large language model. So because it has function hooks that live inside of Bluebeam, you can tell your large language model, like, okay, look through this drawing set, pinpoint any areas that, need to be addressed for XYZ. Or you can say, look in these areas of the drawing and count all of the plumbing items, and also give me a few options for emergency egress paths. And because the AI model has the ability to manipulate the software, it can do those things for you. It'll spit out, okay, David, I'm checking the model now for all of the plumbing items. I'm mapping out the best egress points for based on this floor plan. And you could even then feed it like, okay, like use these constraints, or actually, we need to be following these building codes. Does this drawing fit these codes? And it could be like, actually, like you need to address XYZ items. So I think that this is a really powerful way that Bluebeam is integrating AI into their platform, right? So it's taking the large language models like ChatGPT, like Claude from Anthropic, you know, some of the other ones, and saying like, okay, you could use those, and now you could use those in your drawing.
Yeah, that's really cool. So let's dive into that a bit more. How does Bluebeam Max move Bluebeam kind of from the viewer to the workflow intelligence platform without forcing the teams to abandon kind of familiar habits that they have acquired?
That's a great question, and I think that comes back to the fact that with Bluebeam Max is going to be Bluebeam's new AI superpowered platform, and they're not going to be forcing it on anybody. And again, whenever I do a presentation or do a webinar or anything like that involves AI, you're going to get the question, oh, are they using my data to train the AI? We have NDAs that, uploading to AI might violate those NDAs, and Bluebeam and us ourselves, we are very, very sensitive to that. We know that as things with AI progress, our IP becomes increasingly important. So they're very sensitive to that. Bluebeam Max it's going to be another layer on top of the Bluebeam that you already know and love. And it's just going to enable these certain tools. So it's going to enable that MCP integration that I referred to. It's also going to enable access to Bluebeam's smart review platform, which I kind of touched on some of these elements before, but what the smart review platform will do is it will essentially act as kind of the analyzer of all of your drawings. So if you have all of your drawings stored on the Bluebeam platform, you upload your revised drawing, right? Let's say you're going from revision 1 to revision 2. The platform could automatically create a report of what changed from revision 1 to revision 2. It can notify the participants in the project that need to know about the changes, and it can automatically create tasks for them to do for review. So, it's going to act as, your additional helper. Like before when I described that, your AI junior designer, right? It's going to kind of be like your AI secretary, analyzing the drawings, notifying you of any scope gaps, and creating detailed reports of all of the change orders.
Yeah, very cool. Are there certain kinds of intent and data that already is living inside of PDFs or Bluebeam specifically that most teams don't realize that they're already capturing and that they could leverage?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that every drawing and every PDF tells a story, right? Whether it's a sheet set with your drawings or whether it's a large spec document, a lot of these things just get uploaded, and never looked at again. And I'm especially specifically talking about like specs. I'm talking about building code documents. They just get uploaded, and a lot of times they're never looked at again, or only referenced when like, oh man, it's like need to double check something. So this it comes back to, and this is going to be a theme that keeps coming up with AI. It's being proactive instead of reactive.
Mhm.
AI has all of that information. You don't need to pull up the document and cross-reference this. It's already doing that. It's creating the links. It's ingesting the information. If and of course it goes back to garbage in, garbage out, right? I'm sure you've heard that in grade school when you're doing your math on your calculator. It's only as smart as the idiot pushing the buttons, right? And that's what it's going to be going forward too. But I think what it will do is it will take all of the information that's already being shared and maybe not utilized on a day-to-day basis, and it's going to be able to keep all of that context together while you make decisions going forwards. When it comes time to like make a decision on A versus B, or like design A versus design B, the AI will be able to provide you with all of the context that you need to make that decision.
So we've talked about this a bit through this whole conversation, but how does the AI and PDF leveraging AI, how does that really help the human decision making and the communication, so that the PDF kind of sits as the bridge between that gap?
Yeah, so AI kind of becomes, like I said, your secretary. AI will be able to distill that information down into your actionable items. It's going to be able to notice when a schedule is not going to be met based on certain constraints or other schedules that you're uploading, and it's going to be able to share that information with everybody so that everybody can stay on the same page. So I'm sure you've been a part of organizations where you have the weekly stand up, right? We
Hmm.
have
Yeah.
hours when everyone could kind of touch base, and that's nice. But sometimes you need a little bit more of like an informal and a more immediate update on information, and where I think AI tools can bridge that gap is with being able to again be proactive about communication, be proactive about identifying scope issues, be proactive about identifying, maybe permit issues or issues like that come down the line.
Yeah. So one of the big questions then that comes up when we're talking AI and really leveraging that data to make intelligent and informed decisions is, can you trust the AI?
Mm.
How do you reconcile the trust factor with AI?
Yeah, that's gonna be the huge sticking point going forward. I'm sure if you use AI hallucinates. The way that the large language models are built is they're built to give you the response that it thinks that you want. So the way that it's going to be able to be trusted going forward is there's going to be a few different phases as this becomes a greater part of our industry, right? So the first phase is going to be the kind of hesitant phase where you still need, and again, going back to our metaphor or analogy of having the junior designer, right? You're not going to just take, if you have a junior designer or an intern working on a project, you're not going to ask them to do something and they finish it and you're like, oh, okay, great, let's send it, right?
Yeah. Stamp that
Without
thing.
yeah, yeah, it's you're gonna want to look at it. You're gonna need to validate it, and you're going to need to make corrections. But what's beautiful about AI that and I may not be able to say this about some interns is that the AI will learn. And I don't mean to disparage interns. Interns are great. We love interns. But AI interns, junior designers, they'll learn, right?
Yeah.
So it gives you a design, it gives you a proposal. You can analyze it. You can say, okay, this is fine, but let's make these corrections. We want to do this because of that. We want to do this because of some other thing, and we'll take it from there. And the AI will learn from this, right? So this is how AIs get trained. This is how the whole model works. It's through reinforcement training, just like kids, right? It does something good, you say good job. If it does something bad, you say no, actually, you kind of want to do it like this. And throughout the process, it's going to get better. I definitely foresee some growing pains for sure. I don't think we'll ever be in a situation where, like I said, a building will be completely designed by AI and
Mhm.
no one will look at it. I don't think that that will um, ever be the case. But I do think that it'll be able to get you something 90%, and you can look at it and say like, "Dang, this is pretty close to what I would have done." Let's take that, and I'll take it the rest of the 10%. So, and of course, in this industry, I think we're also naturally skeptical of tools like this, of
Mhm.
tools that maybe take some of this stuff out of the person's hands. And I think that skepticism is natural. I think that skepticism is is beneficial. I think you have to be a little bit skeptical of all of this. I know that um, when Tesla started doing the self-driving things, like yeah, I'm pretty skeptical of that. But as time goes on, I don't know if you've ever been to San Francisco and been in one of those um,
Yeah,
Waymo
I can't do it.
taxis. It's
The
it's
control freak in me comes out too much.
it's crazy. It's crazy, and over time they've gotten better. I've been in one. It was
Yeah,
an insane experience, but it did a dang good job. It got me to
it
where,
got you there. You're alive. Yeah,
yeah,
nice.
here to tell the tale. It was a little unsettling, but it was really cool to see, because you can see the data that it's seeing, you can see the decisions that it's making, and I think as time goes on, I think we will become a little bit more trusting, a little bit more receptive to working these tools into our workflow.
Yeah, very cool. So one of the other things that we talked about earlier was about the quality of conversations or lack thereof in the industry. How how do you think offloading the boring precision work, how does that change the quality of conversation across teams?
Yeah, I think that enhances the quality of conversation, because instead of getting mired down in minutia, you can really focus on higher level decisions. If you're not, having conversations about what code enforcement structure you need to adhere to, and instead are talking about higher level topics, I think it just elevates the conversation. And being able to see all of the data in front of you, being able to kind of interpret that data and um, you know, have an actionable plan on the other side of it. That's what conversations are really about, right? It's not about debating, um, you know, whether a thing should go here or here. It's about, is this right? Is this the right schedule? Is this the right configuration for this space? Do we have, enough office rooms? We recently got a new office in New York, and so we've been dealing with a lot of like, oh, what's the layout going to be like? What's the optimal layout? If we had utilized one of the AI tools, maybe we could have come up with three or four solid layout options where we could say, okay, we need 15 hot desks, we need three different meeting spaces, we need one large conference space, we did need this space for the kitchen, and we could have come up with a few other options, instead of going back and forth with, these desks go here, this desk goes there. And so,
Mhm.
we kind of see it in our daily lives, all the time. We just may not be able to pinpoint exactly where the AI could have helped us.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. So when you're looking out over the next phase of kind of the AEC tech evolution, what gets you most excited about where we're headed?
Ooh, that's a really good question. What makes me really excited is really like the digital twin aspect,
Mm,
and the idea that, I kind of touched on it before, where we know the equations, we know the math, we know the material science, we know, the weather, we know the sun, we know all of this information, right? And a lot of the times we just don't utilize it. So what gets me really excited is AI integrated with IoT, which is Internet of Things, and BIM. So, perfect example would be my old university, Boston University, go Terriers. We had a pilot program where we would thermometers, temperature sensors placed throughout buildings that would be constantly monitored, with the goal of being able to optimize our heating and cooling costs in the winter and the summer, respectively. And so what that really brought to my attention was that the more information that you know about a building, about how it's used, about the people in the building, the better decisions you can make. I'm really excited about buildings that are implementing a lot of IoT sensors between environmental sensors like temperature, humidity, things like that, and also things like leak sensors, climate control, all kinds of aspects of a building. Like tall buildings in Manhattan have vibration sensors, deflection sensors, right? Because they're so tall, they need to they sway in the wind a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so what really excites me is being able to capture all of this data. And right now we have a lot of the data. Like these sensors are there. Like we're capturing the data. A lot of the times we just don't know what to do with the data. We don't, like we have all this temperature data, we have all this vibration data, we have this building sway data. We have all of this information. But what I think that AI can really do for us is it can create actionable metrics and data systems that we can look at and make sense of and say,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I know that this building is being used less between, and this is a very rudimentary example, right? We all leave the office around 5, or we should leave the office around 5. So, and then it opens it back up again at 9. So, we don't need to heat or cool the building that much between those hours, right? So it's a very
Mm-hmm.
rudimentary example, but if we can extrapolate that and expand that to more kinds of information, more kinds of data and sensors, I'm really excited about the kind of the stories that our buildings can tell us about how they're used.
Yeah, for sure. I love that you mentioned the digital twins example because I'm super fascinated by it. I think that there's so much cool potential for that we're just barely scratching the surface on digital twins for sure.
Absolutely.
So as we start to kind of land the plane, a couple of rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
What is the phrase modeling the future? What does that mean and look like to you?
It means modeling the future is everything to me, and I know I take that to heart, right? Because like I said, I'm really excited about the data and the stories that our buildings can tell, and I think that the more stories that we hear, the more stories that we tell, the better stories that we can tell in the future, right? So modeling the future to me, it means constantly learning, it means constantly adapting, and it means always utilizing the most cutting edge technology that we can use. You don't want to leave anything on the table, right?
Yeah. You got my attention with tell more stories. I like that. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation is the cornerstone of our industry. Innovation is what drives us forward as an industry, as a society, as a species. So I see AI, it's very scary in a lot of ways, but it's also very exciting. I'm very excited to see where we can take where innovation. It's scary, but it's also fun.
So how do people find out more information and connect with you?
Yeah, well, we got a lot of awesome events coming up, like Innovate to Build. So you can check it out at graitec.com. Check out our events section. That's going to be an insanely awesome conference. We've got a lot of excellent speakers talking about this very topic. So if you want to see people that are even more experienced than me, if you can believe it, talk about this, I would definitely tune into that. That's Innovate to Build. You can also connect with me personally on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/dspergel, DSPERGEL, and check me out. And I also do a lot of YouTube training videos on Bluebeam, so you can check us out on our YouTube channel as well.
Awesome. I'm biased about Innovate to Build. It's going to be a great event for sure. We'll be airing a podcast there as well too, all about AI and automation. So lots of good content coming from Innovate to Build for sure. So final question for you. If I could give you all construction power and you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you pick to innovate?
Okay, fingers snapped. And now we live in a world where architects, construction companies, and trades are all involved in the design process at the same time. Crazy.
I like
Crazy.
it. I like it.
Yeah. So in my perfect world, an architect is also a construction expert, is also an HVAC, electrical, plumbing expert, and can design a building and a structure with all of those factors in mind. In my dream world, a design would take all of these things into account from the jump. I know we don't live in that world just yet, but if I could snap my fingers, that's the world that I would love to live in.
Yeah. Well, I think we're taking some giant steps forward with everybody's AI junior design assistant now. So we're getting close,
I think so too.
slowly but surely. David, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today.
My pleasure, Todd. Thank you so much for having me.
And now it's time for my Todd takes from this episode. First take, AI is not a threat. It's a force multiplier for people. In AEC, AI isn't replacing expertise. It's removing the tedious, time-consuming work that pulls teams away from judgment, creativity, and problem solving. When the noise is reduced, people can focus on decisions that actually move projects forward. Second take, the industry's real opportunity is turning shared artifacts into shared understanding. Drawings, markups, and documents already hold enormous intent and context. When that information becomes easier to interpret and act on, teams spend less time searching for answers and more time aligning across design, construction, and the field. And finally, better data leads to better conversations and better outcomes. When information is surfaced proactively instead of reactively, collaboration improves. Fewer misunderstandings, fewer late surprises, and clearer accountability create momentum toward predictability, trust, and stronger project delivery. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you are interested in learning more, you can visit our sponsor, Graitec Group, at graitec.com for more information. You can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out our website, bridgingthegappod.com. As always, I'm Todd Weyandt, thanking you for joining the conversation to model the future on the Bridging the Gap podcast. Keep innovating.